Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 8th of March, comes to you from London. Dollar been flat the last day or so, so we are just still below the cloud and bearish and hitting resistance on that point and figure chart as well over the last few days. But we are just pausing at the moment, but we're still bearish on long, medium, and short-term time frames with downside targets activated. So a shortage of short-term downside targets. So it is hard to call the dollar lower at the moment. Looking at the euro, we see that euro we do have a short-term upside target of 127, and we are just breaking some short-term resistance there. Flat here as well on that dollar flatness, but we are just seeing strong charts pretty well all round for the euro. And of course, if we break this 125 level, that would be significant. New highs are good. Looking at the Japanese yen, we see that the dollar has flattened the last few days as well, but we do have still quite a lot of downside targets here on the short-term chart, so that is still significant for the dollar there. And if we look at dollar against sterling, sterling recovered a little bit over the last few days on that dollar weakness, but again, we do see downside targets for sterling against the dollar, so potentially even weaker than the dollar. And looking at sterling against the euro, it's up this morning, but we are still bearish on all three clouds, long, medium, and short term. And we do have downside targets to play for, so it's hard to be bullish on those charts. Looking at the sterling Swiss rate, sterling looking a little bit stronger here, but again lots of downside targets on the short-term chart against the Aussie dollar, sitting at 178. We've been sitting in the doldrums here for quite some time. We can see the flat performance of the last few months really. So the Aussie and the sterling moving relatively in sync. Bitcoin fell quite sharply yesterday, back below $10,000, and we're just below $10,000 this morning. So we are still bearish in the medium and short term. The long-term cloud still holding on. There is downside potential to $8,000 on the short-term chart, and upside to about 10,300. So the picture has changed quite dramatically there, and we are looking more bearish than bullish. The S&P 500 index held on last night. Despite the White House resignation, the US market held up quite strongly with that news, and the futures indicated the market would fall. In fact, it rose. So significant strength there in the face of bad news. So interestingly, we see the same with the Nasdaq, just creeping higher. Needs to break to new highs, of course. There is strong resistance at that 7,011 on the Nasdaq 100, and if we look at the Dow was down slightly, of course, a much lower number of constituents, and still bearish in the short term below the cloud. And the Russell 2000 index also just looking stronger yesterday, up 0.8%. The futures this morning, the S&P 500 futures barely unchanged, but bullish on all three charts, so we are seeing that recovery continuing. And the Nasdaq E-mini, again, bullish on all three charts, up 0.2% this morning. FTSE just not taking any cue from Wall Street, down slightly this morning, and still looking bearish in the medium and short term. And a downside target of 14% activated there on the FTSE, so that's quite worrying. FTSE 250, the mid caps in the UK, also looking weak. We're recovering a little bit here on the short-term chart, so that is looking a little bit better. And the German DAX still bearish below the cloud on the short-term chart, and a downside target of 19% there on that medium-term chart, so that's still looking bearish as well. The CAC 40 in Paris, also bearish, looking very similar to the German chart. If we take a look at Tokyo, we see that we were up about 1/3% overnight, but still looking bearish medium term there as well. Finding support on that short term chart, but we have activated significant downside targets here, 17 and 19%. So still looking a little bit worried on these Asian markets. Hang Seng is probably the best looking one of all, having held up 1.5% yesterday and having held up looking quite strong. The Chinese market was also up and is just recovering through the cloud on the short term, but still has a bit of work to do on that medium term. And the Sensex up at 0.5% as well, but still looking a bit bearish short term with downside targets. So, and the medium term chart just falling out of bed a little bit there. So one we need to be just aware of there. The Australian market also just looking a little bit bearish there. below the cloud in the short term, and the medium term chart just wandering through. So Asia and Australia and European markets not looking as strong as the US markets. A classic case of the US sneezing and other markets catching a cold. Brent crude back below the cloud this morning, so just falling back below that $65 level. This $65 level is becoming a quite important line of action. We've got downside target of 61.38, another 4.8% downside if we go lower and activate that target. And if we look at Texas Lights, WTI, we see here that again we are below the cloud as well. So interestingly, that is playing through too, as we've got 2.3% downside. If we go to new lows, 5.4% downside. So crude just taking a little bit of a turn for the worse in terms of the sentiment there. US nat gas rising, and so we're looking quite good short term, but medium and long term still very much in the doldrums. Taking a look at some of the softs, look at coffee. Coffee is, let's see, here we're just mixed below the cloud. And if we take a look at cocoa, this had a dramatic jump earlier in the week, and we're seeing here prices jumping again. So it's really quite strong the way cocoa has just risen over those last few days. Taking a look at gold, gold sitting at $1,326, so still holding bullish above the cloud. We need to move above this 1340 level to activate this upside target to 1075. Remembering these upside targets become really key. If we can break to 10 above 1075, then gold looks very bullish indeed. Silver just looking a similar picture, bullish above the cloud, but just coming under a little bit of pressure there. And taking a look at 10-year yields on the US 10-year bond, we're seeing here we're still holding bullish. We've got 2.92%, but market really waiting for that 3% level to be broken. Apple. We are looking here at Apple. It's yes, bullish above the cloud, so we're seeing there it's looking better. Amazon, we're seeing is also just moving above the cloud and looking strong. And if we take a look at Google, we see Amazon really looking the strongest of all, actually, still. And if we take a look at Google, we see that Google's just moving above the cloud as well. And Facebook, it's just holding that 180s level now at 183 last night, so looking a little bit better there. And last of all, Microsoft, which has actually really performed pretty well through all of this, still managing to march up the hill on Microsoft. The long-term trend looking great. Short-term, we had a bit of a wobble, but we are still looking good. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.